Hello! It is me, Cultist Jesus. I have come from the warp, and I bring one of Slanisha's greatest bedtime stories. It is a tale full of whimsical, magical, fairy tale wonderment. It is a story of love and tragedy. I am pretty sure that you will like it. So listen up, kitties, and take a seat before Cultist Jesus, and I shall read you a tale upon tales. Now, let Cultist Jesus just turn on the record player. Okay, I am just going to turn on the music to set the mood and soothe your ears. Okay, here goes. Now, let us begin. I am going to tell you. This is a story called Sweet Apple Massacre. I am not sure who the author is, but I do not care, for that is the way chaos is. Now, let us begin. Standing tall, Big Macintosh surveyed the vast apple orchard, containing various sweet and delicious apples. Lust, bright hues offset the green foliage as a sign that it was nearly apple buck season once again. In old sweet apple acres, overlooking not only the quality apparel of each individual apple, but the sheer quantity. A bumper harvest did seem inevitable. This wasn't a bad thing. In fact, it would do good things. Might find around here pocketbook-wise. Nodding in satisfaction, just as his little sis Applejack sauntered over along the orchard, taking point just beside her elder brother. Oh boy, howdy. I sure am glad you ain't injured this time, Big Mac, she said. Why, there's even more apples on them trees than last year. Yep, Big Macintosh replied in his characteristic manner. Them's a lot of apples. Applejack fell silent for a moment, enjoying the shifting breeze pressing against her blonde mane. Soon, a mild quandary posed her mind. Say, I don't reckon y'all seen Apple Bloom anywhere, have ya? Been looking for her all day. She's ain't nowhere to be found. Big Macintosh shook his head firmly in regret. Sorry, sis, I can't say that I have. Of course, concern started to set in at a mild pace. She berated aloud. Darn, that silly filly's probably done gone off somewhere with her friends. Just hope she ain't done got herself into any mischief, or else there be hay to pay. Her big brother simply reassured her with a reply. Don't you fret, Applejack. I'm sure Apple Bloom is perfectly fine. Now I need to get back to the barn and press some more apples for my home-brewed apple cider. I have picked a apples earlier, especially all nice and plump and ripe, and they ain't gonna press themselves. Applejack laughed. Y'all sure do love your cider, don't ya? Just make sure poor little Apple Bloom don't get her hooves on it again. Don't wanna go repeating last time. This statement sorta distracted Applejack with a few moments of laughter from the past. Yet it still did make her worry. Maybe she would go check around town a little and ask her friends if they had seen hide nor hair of her little sis. As for Big Macintosh, he only chuckled along with his sister for a second before giving one final yep and moving along. That's what the large red-hued pony did, trotting back along the dirt trail through the orchard, mind drifting to more important things. Sweet Apple Acre's beauty had become lost on Big Mac now. He had some apples to press. With a creaky wail, the side barn doors slid open, allowing a traveler through. The large stallion shifted his weight into the structure, only to glance around for a moment before using a hind hoof to shut the door gently. No sense in making a ruckus. Afterwards, he maneuvered throughout the barn until coming over to an obscure corner of the barn with a great deal of hay piled up. It looked like an unused area of the barn that was being occupied by an overabundant source of hay. They probably had a little too much, and so it was put here. Big Macintosh began to sift through the hay, aside with a little hoofwork to reveal a trapdoor leading down into a cellar, which is odd. This was their old disused apple cellar, unlike the new one built outside the barn, with more space and unused for housing apples. This was only thought to be filled with junk now. Nothing more than closet space containing junk such as scrap metal, old worn-out plows, old rope, and various other bits and bobs that had outlived their usefulness. Big Macintosh often came down here when he wanted to get away from the world, to withdraw for a little while for some peace and quiet. Today, however, was a little different. In itself, the ropes at least had found a new use, because in the cellar space were three special guests: Apple Bloom and her fellow cutie mark crusaders, Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo, bound and gagged, propped up against the wall, alongside some dusty prow and raggedy table. Three pairs of scared, round eyes looked up at Big Macintosh as he approached. "Now then, "You three fillies," he said, as placid as ever. "Y'all need to learn a lesson. You need to learn not to mess around with Big Macintosh. All I want is some peace and quiet," he said, looking directly at Apple Bloom. The little red-haired filly cowered under his gaze. "All I want is a quiet life, without all you cutie mark crusaders running around the place, making with the noise. When I'm finished with y'all, there ain't gonna be a peep from y'all ever again." Big Macintosh started to lurk towards them at a menacingly slow pace, and as he did so, Scootaloo flapped her wings in desperation, struggling to get off the ground. This only achieved one thing: amusement in their captor. "Now, ain't that silly?" With a laugh, Big Mac leaned forward, snagging a wing just by the jaws, jerking her to the ground. Scootaloo grunted, force being pulled down, only to have a massive hoof hold her meager frame down. It was then Big Macintosh began to twist the wing slowly around, causing a fiery discomfort in the muscle and joints before jerking hard, producing a grotesque bone-cracking snap. The wing fell limp, while gagged whimpers and tears poured out like waterfalls, pulling back from the flightless filly with a grin, admiring her misfortune now. "Your wings are useless now, you silly filly," pleasantly pointing out, relocating over to a rusty old toolbox sitting atop a dusty old table beside them. Worked it open only to retrieve a well-worked knife that had seen better days. It was dull, chipped, and rusty, but still usable. Reapproaching the fillies, only to drop it before them, and speaking in a more stern tone. "I'm gonna take off those gags now," he said. "First one to scream gets their tongues cut out." First gag to drop was Sweetie Bells. She only glanced up to him with terror as tears began to well up in her eyes, her body trying to shrivel up in fear as it took all her courage to fight the urge to scream. She managed silence. Next was Scootaloo, who had even more reason to scream, but not because of fear. Pain. The broken wing was burning all over, and part of the bone had pierced the muscle on the inside. This caused even more pain. With each movement of the wing, a suffering whine slipped out amongst her heavy breathing. Still, she managed to resist the urge to scream. only to silently cry until the pain subsided. Last would be Apple Bloom, she who only stared up at her big brother, with her large round eyes filled with fear and incomprehension. This was Big Macintosh after all. Her big brother and the gentlest of souls, wasn't he? Surely this just a horrible joke. But she had seen the hoof work done to Scootaloo, and it was definitely no joke. Taking in a deep breath, Applejack! Big Macintosh shoved her hoof into Apple Bloom's mouth, silencing her scream with a haste, releasing a sigh, only to shake his head in disappointment. I done told y'all not to be screaming, Apple Bloom. You should listen to your big brother. Of course, the frightening Apple Bloom pushed away the stallion's hoof, only to stutter out a few words. I'll scream and scream again, and Applejack will hear, and Apple Bloom said, faltering. A moment of thought slipped past Big Mac's noggin, speaking as if realization just hit him flat in the face. You know, I kinda hope you do. After all, I still ain't forgiven Applejack for that injury she gave me last Applebuck season. If you want Applejack to join y'all down here, scream away. For one, would welcome her company. Now to business. Once again, Big Macintosh wielded the knife, and he loomed over the cowering Apple Bloom, pressing a hoof down on her tied-up body to keep her from squirming too much. The hoof specifically pressed against her face, and a jaw at the spot where enough pressure applied would force Apple Bloom to open her mouth and to keep still, maneuvering with none of the precision like that of a doctor, forced the knife into his little sister's mouth, its dull, jagged edge tearing at her flesh, ripping and twisting at her tongue. Squeals of pain gurgled through gushing blood, pouring past her lips. Before long came the severed tongue. Oh, sorry, I got carried away. The sight of this mutilation was too much for Sweetie Belle. Stomach tossing and turning, gurgitation forced itself up her esophagus, erupting into a flow of yellowish-green chunks of today's dinner. A revolting acidic smell began to fill the air, which then caused another whale of vomit to spew out from the sick-ridden pony from just having whiffed the stomach contents. Scootaloo could merely look away, having slightly recovered from her own pain. All the while, Apple Bloom continued to try and scream. But sadly, it sounded like gurgling pleas of help from a drowning pony. Soon, Applebloom collapsed into tears and then falling unconscious from shock and pain. Big Macintosh merely rolled the knife aside in easy reach for a moment, using one hoof to roll the bloody severed tongue over the dirty ground into the revolting vomit, smearing it around before picking it up in the cleft of his hoof, glancing off into the direction of Scootaloo with a grin. "You hungry?" This question brought Scootaloo's attention, vigorously shaking her head while casting a glare and speaking most defiantly towards him. If Rainbow Dash was here, she would kick the crap out of you. You maniac! Having found courage in a situation where all hope seemed lost. Big Macintosh merely shrugged this notion off. "Well, she ain't, and anyway, I wouldn't be so sure about that. Rainbow Dash ain't as tough as she likes to make out." Approaching Scootaloo, who seemed to squirm away into the wall in pain. Pushing the vomit and blood-covered meat into her face, but more importantly, into her lips, forcing it into her mouth. But Scootaloo rebelled the best her small body could, yet she was no match. Big Macintosh forced the disgusting morsel into her mouth. At that moment, he used the same hoof to keep her mouth shut. "Don't you go trying to spit it out now," calmly speaking, with a little laugh to follow, as the filly struggled and squirmed in mocking fashion. "Didn't your mother ever tell you how important it is to chew your food?" Scootaloo closed her eyes while desperately flapping her one good wing left, eventually swallowing Applebloom's tongue. The smell of vomit filling her senses now, she was soon becoming ill herself. Sweetie Belle laid on the floor, still quite sick, but she watched in horror as what was going to happen next. Her body trembling in revulsion, Big Macintosh had flipped Scootaloo around and mounted her. At first, she wasn't sure what was going on, but the loud, agonizing scream knew that her friend was in severe pain. The stallion began to forcefully rape the filly, shoving his penis into her virgin vagina, tearing it slightly, causing blood to seep out with each painful thrust. Sweetie Belle's ear drooped. She was too naive to know what was going on, but it looked painful, especially when Scootaloo was being humped and thrashed around. With a broken wing, Apple Bloom was still dead to the world, bleeding from the mouth, but alive and kicking. It was at this point Big Macintosh felt jovial. Cutie Mark, Crusader, rape victims, speaking in a tender mockery as he continued to fuck Scootaloo. Then it clicked, followed by a chuckle. Guess y'all found your purpose in life now. Your special talent is getting raped. Yup. After what was a good 20 to 25 minutes, Big Macintosh released his load inside of Scootaloo before deciding to pull out. No sooner after withdrawing, a hoof befell the filly sharply, pounding her in the face a couple times. The damage was done. Her nose had been broken, and blood was spurting out. Scooping up some of the blood, some of the leftover vomit, and of course, used with his tongue so that it mixed with his saliva, brought it down to Scootaloo's mouth, spitting the rank mixture into her mouth, quickly clamping her mouth shut with a hoof, her shattered nose broken and flooding with blood, making it hard to breathe, only to force the poor filly to swallow the disgusting mixture. Treat were gagging. So delicious. All the while, while Scootaloo retched and spat and cried, he turned to Sweetie Belle, taking notice of how she was far too shocked and traumatized to respond, unbound the little unicorn and gently grabbed her and guided her along. With a amusing thought and not much effort, forced Sweetie Belle's horn up Scootaloo's ass, who yet again suffered another onslaught of pain. Yelping aloud, but the horn was too big and hard for her. So the skin around Scootaloo's ass was ripped, and blood and fecal matter trickled before pouring down profusely onto Sweetie Belle's face. The trauma has caused Scootaloo to relax, urine without warning, right into Sweetie Belle's face. Big Macintosh backed away from his hoofwork, only to speak out in a pleased tone. "You keep doing that, Sweetie Belle," he said, the unicorn far too traumatized to rebel, like Scootaloo or Apple Bloom, carrying on, pushing her horn up Scootaloo's anus. Slowly but surely, her normally well-groomed pink and purple man was now stained in a reddish brown, glistening with wetness of urine and blood. Once again the stallion spoke. If you stop, I'll come over there and get creative. I may seem a bit dense, but I'm actually quite creative stallion, you know. Big Macintosh said, of course, with a wink. Yup. Trotting along over to where he discarded the knife was only to once again pick it up. He was gonna need this. Yup, he thought, looming over the unconscious form of Apple Bloom, whose figure only aroused the stallion by just staring at it. This was gonna be tricky to do, but Big Macintosh sometimes liked a challenge. So, positioning the unconscious filly just right against the same dusty table, the same one with the toolbox on it, and then without moment's notice, forcefully penetrated his little sister, pounding into her wildly while taking task to mind, leaning his head down over, forcing the knife into her gut, close to the flank. And this is where multitasking got tricky. While violating his own little sister, he somehow managed to pull the knife upwards, allowing her innards to spill out into a rainfall of blood. One task complete, and knife set aside, glanced back to Sweetie Belle, whom pleased him by obediently obeying in anally penetrating Scootaloo. Although she was covered in blood and feces and urine by now, glancing back to Apple Bloom, he quickly grabbed her crimson entrails, coiling them around her neck in a chokehold as he continued to fuck and ravage her body with a hoof and his mouth. He pulled the intestines around her neck like that of a binding snake. Eventually, her frail windpipe gave and snapped loudly with a grinding crunch. Her mouth still pouring like a fountain of blood. Even after her death, Big Macintosh continued to have his way with her corpse, pounding away until the body began to lose form and collapse into a quivering, amorphous mass of fur and blood and flesh. The perineum had fallen away, leaving a single red and raw gaping void. He carried on until he was fucking nothing more but a single swollen and bloody orifice. And then discarded his babysitter's carcass as though she were nothing more than a rotten apple core. Taking up the same knife once again, consolidating across the room only to grab Sweetie Belle and toss her aside. He forced himself into Scootaloo's ruined anus, Scootaloo had been racked with so much pain, and her body was so tired she couldn't fight back or scream, only take it. It all felt the same, agonizing, burning, and tearing sensation berating her nerve endings. Though he didn't stop, there the knife swoop came into her stomach and upward, spilling her guts like a breaking dam of crimson gore, and both hooves ripping her head off. It didn't take much work for a stallion of his stature and strength. Flesh tore, blood splattered, and her lungs rattled as joints popped and tore. Finally, the head was ripped free. Scootaloo was gone. In her final moments, she only knew humiliation and pain. After death, she became the dead sexual play toy of Big Macintosh as he fucked her head and other regions until boredom set in. Sweetie Belle, last of the Cutie Mark Crusaders, stood barely conscious in this world, overcome with nausea, stench of blood, shit, and piss that covered her horned face. The world began to spin inside her head, as did her posture. No longer able to stand, she fell to the floor onto her rear. It was at this moment Big Macintosh came at her with the knife, not quickly, but at a calm trot's pace, standing before her with a glance as she looked up to him with those green eyes. Blurred vision as the world spun around her. One hoof swiftly forced Sweetie Belle to the ground, and so did the knife plunge, darkening the vision in one eye. As it twisted, vitreous fluid began to dribble out onto the handle. Sweetie Belle screeched out in agony, while involuntarily releasing her bowels all over the floor and adding to the aromas mixtures within the old apple cellar. Quickly, a hoof covered her mouth, silencing the blighting filly, only to withdraw the knife to once again repeat the process, but in the other eye. Sharp pain being muffled by an overgrown hoof. Now the blind filly could no longer see her captor and attacker, licking away some of the vitreous fluid from the knife's handle. Now he began to methodically cut and hack at her front and left hoof, being quite a shitty knife at that it was. It took a grand effort to get through the skin, bone, and cartilage, but eventually the bone splintered and the leg came off. This process was repeated on the other legs until all four were amputated and nothing remained but bloody stumps with slimy white ligaments and broken bone shards hanging out. At some point, Sweetie Belle had passed out. The overwhelming pain was far too much for her pitiful body to bear, utilizing the knife to gouge out her once beautiful but now ruined green eye from its socket. He crammed his penis directly into the tight socket, penetrating deeply, repetitively into her brain. It was a tight squeeze, just like their virginity, and he enjoyed it. The warmth, the sleek, squishy feel of the gray matter around his shaft just seemed to send his penis into a throbbing insanity. After releasing into her brains a feeling sweet relief, he poured out, only to take the same head, cracking it open right against the ground with a sickening blow. Bending down, rummaging through the shrapnel of bone to devour the delicious gray matter, feeling each warm, slimy, and tough morsel slip past his throat, occasionally getting stuck, only having to spit out a bone here and there occasionally. After finishing the meal, he returned to Sweetie Belle's corpse and began to rape its ass with his engorged penis, smearing what fecal matter that remained in her rectum all over his member. After growling bored of that, he took one of Sweetie Belle's amputated legs and forced it up her own ass. Then he did the same to Apple Bloom and Scootaloo's body, forcing amputated limbs inside, hoof first, as far as it could go. It was strange, he thought, that he still lumps of torn flesh that he was fucking with Sweetie Belle's leg had been so vibrant and alive such a short time ago. Now were not but all 3 dead pieces of flesh, then finally finishing up with one final voluminous load into Apple Bloom's destroyed backside. He watched with satisfaction as the semen and blood and shit mixed together, forming a foamy maroon pool. He bit down and greedily lapped it up, some of it with his tongue, pressing his tongue deep inside her anal cavity so as not to miss any. Letting some dribble down his chin, it tasted foul, of course, a rancid, tangy slime that burned his throat, but it felt so satisfying. He swallowed the filthy goo and wiped his mouth with a hoof. It was done. Big Macintosh would finally get his peace and quiet. Big Macintosh? You down there? It was Applejack. He looked down at the disfigured corpses of the 3 fillies, all now barely recognizable as the oh-so-sweet Cutie Mark Crusaders, and realized he felt strangely unsatisfied. It had all been a bit too quick and easy. Now Applejack, that would be a challenge. She was Ponyville's best athlete after all. She even had the prize pony of Ponyville's trophy to prove it. Of course, he still hadn't forgiven her for that injury. He felt his penis stiffen once more in sheer anticipation. Hey, Big Mac, I said, are you down there? came Applejack's lifting. Voice again, this time more insistent. Big Macintosh replied serenely, I sure am, sis. Hey, come down here a minute. I've got something to show you. Sure thing. What is it? It's a surprise. Oh boy, I sure do love surprises. Something real nice, I'll bet. Something real nice. Big Macintosh merely looked at the mangled flesh and littered the ground in pools of blood, fecal matter, urine, and entrails. His was the mutilated remains of the guilty mock crusaders, lip curling into a wonderful smile, and with placid eyes to back up the smile. Yep.
This quiet offends, Slanesh! Things shall get loud now!